Dark Secret Place with Brian Suits on KFI.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is a Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight live on KFI, Los Angeles' number one Saturday night show. No commercial-free dance parties here. Just very, very depressing, realistic talk about what's going on in the world today. Because, and also on the YouTube, streaming at least the first hour live if my tablet battery stays up. So you can go to unsheepyourself.com and see the live stream, or Dark Secret Place for the Twitter. Next hour, what did a Taliban prisoner do? What language did he speak to get American soldiers to react like this? That answer next hour. Also, the president of China declaring himself, with the help of his Central Committee and Politburo, the president for life in China. Is this a sign of strength or a sign of weakness for China? We'll talk about that next hour, because there is a growing consensus, specifically amongst actual Chinese, who can give us context about what exactly is going on in China. And is this an ominous development, or is this something indicating maybe that China is about to enter a very delicate phase called collapse and depression? We'll get to that. Well, there is that old saying that you may forget the past, but the past hasn't forgotten you. And for all of you thinking that Vladimir Putin was just a regional strongman doing regional skullduggery by taking Crimea, etc., in Vladimir Putin's words, "We tried to talk to you for 20 years, now listen to us." Vladimir Putin at sort of a State of the Union address earlier this week in Moscow, announcing some pretty eye-popping new missile systems that, if you've been listening to the Dark Secret Place, you shouldn't be surprised by a couple of them. But there were several that we're finding out actually were a surprise to Western media. The Pentagon is saying not a surprise to them. Here is a report from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
He said it was invincible and could hit anyone on the planet with a nuclear payload.
Sarmat is a highly formidable weapon. No missile defense systems, not even future ones, are capable of stopping it.
Putin was delivering his annual State of the Nation address in Moscow, and he used it to unveil a new arsenal of strategic weapons, which he said had been developed and tested. He told the audience that this submarine-based missile was impossible to and could deliver nuclear warheads. Putin suggested a nationwide contest to find a name for it.
It's simply fantastic. They're almost silent, highly maneuverable, and practically invincible to the enemy. At the present time, the means to counter them simply do not exist anywhere in the world.
There was also a new nuclear-powered cruise missile with practically unlimited range.
Okay, what? A what powered cruise? I mean, something flying? A flying thing that's nuclear powered? The hell? Say that again, English guy.
There was also a new nuclear-powered cruise missile with practically unlimited range, an air-to-surface missile called Kinjal, and a ballistic missile with wings, which he said approached its target like a meteorite.
I want to tell all those who have fueled the arms race over the last 15 years and introduced unlawful sanctions aimed to contain our country's development, including the military field. Everything you wanted to stop with your policies has now happened. You have failed to contain Russia. Applause. Clap. Please clap. So anyway, he didn't really say please clap. That was Jeb Bush. But and you know what? You know what the difference between Jeb Bush and Vladimir Putin is? Vladimir Putin doesn't have to say please clap. When Vladimir Putin says they have failed to contain Russia, that is a sure thing applause line for any Russian leader. And I mean, this goes back to Peter the Great. So what about these new wonder weapons? You've heard me talking about the gigantic, the so-called Status 6, the gigantic World War II size unmanned submarine that is actually a nuclear-powered unmanned submersible vehicle, a USV, basically an underwater drone, a drone submarine with a nuclear warhead, upwards of 300 megatons. Why do they have it? We had that discussion. Do they have it as a dead man switch? If everything else is gone, if their land-based missiles are gone, all their subs are gone, and their command structure is gone, do these things automatically wake up and sail into San Pedro and San Francisco and New York Harbor? Well, that's one possibility, right? But why would you want to do that? I don't know. But that's just one of several weapons, including. But now here's the thing. And this is where the old Russian hands, the old Russia watchers, the guys who retired in the mid 90s, late 90s, thinking my job here is done. They're being woken up. They're being called, because what we want to know is this old school Russian disinformation? I mean, all Putin did was show a couple live launches of what were some kind of ICBM. But the other things he showed, when he went to the big board, he was showing CGI. He was showing animation. And to be dead honest with you, it was kind of second-rate animation. Yeah, one of the Sarmat missile, which means death to Shepay. It was shown in animation, leaving presumably somewhere in Russia and going over the North Pole, where all of our missile defenses are, exactly what we'd think they'd be doing. But then there was a simultaneous track of another identical missile launching out of Russia and going around the South Pole, going the long way around. And the crowd automatically broke into spontaneous applause. And so then, as that missile approached North America, the CGI switched to the warhead, and the warhead was a multiple warhead, what's called a MIRV, a multiple independently targeted reentry vehicle. It had 8 separate reentry vehicles, and they broke away from their carrier, and the next shot was them raining down on Central Florida. And it was funny. It took a day or two for a lot of media people to figure out where that was, but it was in the center was Lake Okeechobee, that giant lake in the middle of Florida, and then it cut off the southern tip of Florida and then the Panhandle. But that's what it was. It was nuclear missiles raining down on take that Florida, and not that anyone in Florida would notice that they've been nuked. But so anyway, we'll yeah. But Putin's game is way different than a guy with only 1 or 2. So we'll talk about the difference and how much is the American defense establishment putting stock in this. Did he really announce 6 working weapons, or is he blue skying this? Santa more coming up. It is a Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight. KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. Michael Chapé with the news.
Cops in Garden Grove have shot and killed a man at a 7-Eleven parking lot.
So who was first up? Jolene. Jolene was first. I believe you were actually the first on there. Is this thing jumping? I got to get the signage. By the way, on Monday, Starting next week, Gary and Shannon are filling in. Yes, I did, Wayne. Thank you very much. I started at chapter 7, the the death of the G's, because that's always fascinated me. And thank you for that thumb drive. That is some really cool animation. Monday, Gary and Shannon are filling in for Bill Handel till further notice. And I am filling in for Gary and Shannon till further notice. So I'm going to be 10 to 2, probably all week. I don't know. So 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So it might be all week. Probably will be all week. No, the meeting with the boss was actually to confirm that that I'm the number one show on Saturday night. All right, we're gonna use Cowpunk by Scott Goddard. Yeah, Bill needs to heal up his back. So that is the issue. There, he needed to rest his back, and he didn't, and he re-injured it. Even though in radio, I mean, whatever, you're sitting here like this is so fucking hard, but but yeah, it was off air that he was injuring it. So.
Welcome to Mo on the Movies.
It's finally here, the most anticipated movie in the history of Marvel Cinematic Universe. Black Panther is here, telling the story of T'Challa, newly crowned king of the technologically advanced and hidden African country of Wakanda, and its guardian, the Black Panther. The movie is enjoying both critical acclaim and financial success unseen for a superhero non-sequel movie. The cast features Academy Award winners Forrest Whitaker and Lupita Nyong'o, Academy Award nominees Daniel Kaluuya and Angela Bassett. It stars Chadwick Boseman, who first debuted Black Panther in Marvel's Captain America Civil War back in 2016.
Yep, all good. All good.
Michael B. Jordan. Get ready to enjoy the journey. Black Panther.
Hey, did anyone else get snow? We had snow this morning.
In 2 years, more than 13 million small businesses may be launched. And in 2 years,
Yeah, Herman and I are good buddies. I'd like to work with him. It would be cool if I did the morning show on KTTH up in Seattle. But you know, we do a different kind of radio down here in LA. You know, so I can say on the air that, you know, Dean Logan wiped my ass with his ballot, but you can't say that on a Bonneville station because they're owned by Mormons.
Brought to you by Taco Bell. Introducing Taco Bell's $1 nacho fries. Covered
But yeah, Todd Herman is a great guy. I'd love to have him fill in down here on KFI.
Many of the county awards will take place in Los Angeles. Although this is the highest award for people in the entertainment industry, the one question that will be asked more than any other has absolutely nothing to do with their craft. I'll explain on this.
The Jesus Christ Show. Tomorrow morning at 6 on KFI AM 640.
more stimulating talk.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight live. And a significant speech being given by Vladimir Putin, President for Life of Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. And it was a flashback. It was Back to the Future. As Putin, in his fiery concluding remarks, said that maybe you didn't want to talk to us, but now you have to listen to us, as he announced a bunch of new strategic systems, that is, systems designed to deliver nuclear weapons, and including, as you heard from that report that I played a little bit before there, the thing about a hypersonic maneuverable nuclear bomb reentry vehicle nuclear weapon. So it goes, it's launched as a regular ICBM, but its warhead then has its own propulsion. It doesn't just get boosted into space. Its warhead is a hypersonic weapon that winds up going Mach 8 or Mach 9, plus is maneuverable. Everything that Putin showed was meant to counter American ballistic missile defense, all of its layers. And that means from local, what's called theater high-altitude air defense, the THAAD system that's either sitting in Guam or sitting in South Korea, or the sea-based Aegis systems that can even intercept low Earth orbit satellites. And theoretically, they can hit incoming ICBMs. And in actuality, some of them have successfully intercepted those, and so they're a very real threat of intercepting ICBMs. All of these things, and this includes North Korea and China as well, all of these things are based on intercepting something on a ballistic path. And ballistic means after its launch event or firing event, there's no more there's no more input or interaction with the atmosphere. It follows a ballistic path. In other words, like a bullet from a gun or an arrow from a longbow. But now imagine that you had an arrow that had maneuverable control surfaces, and you had an app on your phone, and you launched the arrow, but then you went to the phone and you maneuvered the arrow as it came back down after its apogee, and it was heading down to your target. You actually maneuvered that. Well, that's what Putin was displaying, because he knows that he's taking advantage of the fact that we know, as you know if you've been listening to the show, that the great vulnerability in the American so-called ground-based missile defense, GMD, ground-based mid-course defense that's based at Vandenberg and based at Fort Greely, Alaska, that its great weakness, its great Achilles heel is that it's kind of a bit, ineffective. By ineffective, I mean as a one missile versus one incoming ballistic missile, it's barely north of 50%. But don't worry, says the Pentagon, because we're going to fire 3 missiles per incoming missile. So with overlap, we have north of a 90% kill ratio for those incoming missiles. But that is if the incoming missile is fired on a predictable ballistic path. And Putin is saying we're in a different world now. And the missiles that you thought we would be lofting at you circa 1988, just like yours, were ballistic. Ours are no longer ballistic. They fire like a ballistic missile, but somewhere mid-course, they start maneuvering. And that's just the ballistic missiles. There was another really interesting system, a nuclear-powered cruise missile. And here's the deal about that. If you're unaware of this, nuclear power is very, very, very hard to adapt to aeroplanes. One of the first obvious side uses of nuclear propulsion was clear to everybody in the U.S. Navy by noon on August 6, 1945, when they understood the power of nuclear power, that if you controlled the fission, all you did was generate heat. Well, what's a steam engine? It's a heat source, boiling water, right? Maybe it was coal-powered or wood-powered in the 1880s, and then coal-powered by the 1890s. And then bunker fuel, what you would call diesel, was powering naval ships by World War I. But there were no great leaps in propulsion till after World War II. Because, again, once you keep in mind that a naval ship, a submarine, and a surface ship, that all they do is generate steam. That is what they do. A gas turbine, it's just generating steam. I'm sorry, it's actually direct driving. But a nuclear reactor on a ship is just a controlled bit of fission boiling water. And that water turns a turbine, and the turbine turns the drive shaft, and at the end of the drive shaft is a propeller. It's really remarkably simple. And it was one of the most obvious uses of nuclear power after World War II. And the U.S. Navy developed it faster than anybody else and has perfected it better than anyone else. And then the Air Force got in the act. And the Air Force in the mid-50s said, okay, what if we had a nuclear-powered airplane? And I know on the surface of that, you're saying, GTFO, you really are telling me that the U.S. Air Force considered putting nuclear reactors in bombers that would then go aloft literally for weeks or months if they could. The shortcoming was, how long can these guys hold their poop? How long can they, how much food can you put in there? Yeah, there's a way to put a nuclear reactor in an airplane and have it effectively superheat incoming air so that the air expands and you have a jet engine. Well, we dropped the idea for many reasons, but the number one reason was damn, which is a great reason. The Russians Putin claims that they have now a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Why do you need a cruise missile that can circle around for months? Well, we'll delve into this here in just a second. What are the old Russian hands saying? Are they saying they buy this? They buy this hooey? Or is Putin telling a big fib to get us to play poker with him? We'll be back right after this. It is a Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight on KFI, AM 640. More stimulating talk. Michael Chappé with the news.
Cops in North Hollywood say a worker at an auto parts store near the Flamingo Motel in North Hollywood told them that he opened fire on a man seen breaking into a vehicle, a man that he shot.
Well, I kind of do. I do. I do more than I'm comfortable with anyway. Yeah, the guy, Nicholas Cruz, only had 10-round mags, which is really weird because Florida doesn't have a magazine law like we do. You can have 30-round mags in Florida. In fact, I'm not sure, but can anyone correct me on this? Does any other state even have a magazine limit? I thought only California had the 10-round mag limit. I don't know. I don't. Maybe you know what? Maybe New York, but But here's the deal. I mean, no other state has a regime of regulations that alter the actual appearance of an AR-15 the way that California does. Colorado has a magazine limit, Bazooka Joe. Colorado has a 10-round limit. Really? That's stupid, is what that is. Oh, that's right. Magpul moved, and they did that big giveaway and all that. Yeah. So Todd, if you ever get a chance in the afternoon, there's a guy in Seattle named Todd Herman. Really, really smart guy, great conservative guy. We go way, way back to Salt Lake City, and we want to do a show where I compare California's craziness with Washington's, and we have a battle of the liberal states. And it would be a weird situation where we're both debating, our various states' insanity. But the deal there is, no matter how bad Washington is with like expensive trains and, liberal drug policies and all that, they don't have the illegal alien issues that we do here. So California wins for pure batshit craziness. California wins. I have to play Poker Face by Lady Gaga. I'm talking about Putin. He's got he has a poker face. I have not been to Moses Lake for, I think, about 4 years. I went to Warden. Yeah, I worked with Dave Ross, I guess, for about 4 years. My first, in fact, when I was hired, the boss at Cairo, I did a fill-in on Sunday night as an audition when I got back from Bosnia. And she called me like at 10 at night. She goes, "Hey, you sounded great. Let's talk tomorrow." And I went, "Oh, okay, great." I thought, hey, I got the job. And she said, "Can you fill in for Dave Ross?" And Dave Ross is this talk radio institution in Seattle, if you don't know him. And I grew up listening to the guy. And so now my very first job in talk radio, the first day of my first job, I was filling in for this legendary host in Seattle. But Columbine had just happened. So it actually was, for me, it was a really easy way to get into talk radio. Yeah, his Baghdad trip, I was in contact with him, and I was going to take him around personally and give him a personal tour. The guy was terrified of leaving the green zone. So when I got back, and I went over to Cairo to see him, and I said, "What happened, man?" And he avoided me. What's that? Yeah.
AM 640.
An iHeart radio station.
Home of KFI in the sky.
So you get it? Poker face. KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight. So the speech that Putin made earlier this week, was it just poker face? Yeah, I never liked that song. So anyway, here's where we have to go back. This is where some of the guys that have retired from the and women who have retired from the intelligence community, and I think this is what's sort of would blow a lot of people away. The number of women analysts that were in the American intelligence infrastructure, both NSA, CIA, defense intelligence, and all that, would probably shock most people. Because if you're thinking that the 50s and 60s looked like Mad Men, the American intelligence community, it didn't look like Mad Men. It looked like I don't know, today. But the balance of power between the U.S. and the USSR through the nuclear phase of the Cold War, which was about 43 of the 47 years, was based on a fairly simple concept that most liberals never really truly understood, and that was the very predictable outcome of mutually assured destruction, of deterrence. And I'll never forget, I was in college, and Governor Mario Cuomo of New York was giving the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention, and he was denouncing Reagan's new Minuteman missile. And in his speech, he said, we're spending billions on a missile that probably never will be used. And I mean, I was 19 at the time, and I yelled back at the TV, yeah, Dip S, that's the point. And it seemed irrational to people for years and years and years, and we kept pouring money into that, but that was the entire point, was that the Soviet Union and the United States had approximately equal effects on each other, maybe not equal technology, but equal effects. The effect of Soviet nuclear power would be to wipe out North America. And the effect of American nuclear power, maybe fewer missiles, but better technology and quality, would be to do the same thing. And the proof is in the pudding. There was no nuclear war for 47 years. And even though in the media and a lot of liberal academics would sit there and tell you that we were at the edge, we were on the brink during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, as it turns out, not really that much. Certainly not as close as we were in the closing days of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, where we were far closer to actually crossing swords with Soviet forces either on the ground in Egypt or at sea in the Mediterranean. But that one doesn't get the sexiness of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because Nixon was the president at the time. But anyway, bottom line, it worked. And right now, as we speak, Russian and American nuclear forces have treaty-mandated parity in certain classes of weapons. Even though there's no more Soviet Union, we still have that. And the Russians have admitted that not all their missiles are aimed at the U.S. And where a missile is aimed is fairly academic. It's not like mechanics have to get down there in the silo and start adjusting vanes and rudders and things. But regardless, it's always a thing. When the United States announced that certain targets in the former Soviet Union were no longer targeted, we had to make that public announcement. Well, what Putin's doing, and it really is up to the technology analysts to decide whether or not these things are technically feasible, because the Russians have a track record of publicly announcing weapon systems that they have no intention of actually pioneering and making because it would cost too much money. But what they do is they phony them up, knowing full well that we have to assume that there's a possibility that they really made the missile. And a great example is in the early 70s, when the United States began an anti-ballistic missile program. Before we had the ABM treaty, the U.S. began stunning the Soviet Union by pioneering an anti-ballistic missile treaty. Now, around the LA area are all these old so-called Nike Zeus and Nike Ajax sites, right? Above Santa Clarita is the headquarters. You can just drive up there and walk around. There's one out on the very west end of Mulholland. There's a huge, now it's a state park, and that was a Nike anti-bomber missile site. And there were Army troops garrisoned in Encino. Like in the 50s and 60s, there were these dudes walking around Encino as if it was, Dusseldorf or something. And those missiles were intended to intercept incoming Russian bombers, not missiles. And so by the late 60s, as technology advanced, primarily originating here in Southern California, the possibility of intercepting ballistic missiles began to raise its, to be on the horizon. This stunned the Russians because they realized we are a decade behind them. They're going to field this, and we're 10 years from even being close. The Russians had world-class surface-to-air missiles, but the technology, the computational requirements for speeds 100 times what an aircraft flies, or 1,000, the Russians couldn't do. And the Russians realized the second we field an ABM system, an anti-ballistic missile system, then the Russians don't have parity. We don't have mutually assured destruction. We have American advantage because we're going to shoot their ballistic missiles down. And so what the Russians did was they built a phony building outside of Moscow. Not 100 miles outside of Moscow, but just outside the Outer Ring Highway, so that it was observable from the road. So American intelligence people driving around Moscow saw this thing that was being built outside of Moscow, and it appeared that there were radars on the outside of this new building that went up really quickly. And then at the next May Day parade, and the next October Revolution parade, when the Russians paraded their ballistic missiles past, they all go by and everyone goes, yay. And then the tanks go by, the armor goes by, everyone goes, yay. And then the anti-aircraft, the air defense, which is a separate branch of service in the old Soviet military, the air defense got their part of the parade, right? So surface-to-air missiles go by. We see those. We'd seen them all. And then all of a sudden, this new missile gets trucked by that no one had ever seen before. And it looked big. It looked like possibly a 3-stage missile. And it was very pointy. It wasn't a ballistic missile, but it wasn't a surface-to-air missile. Could it be that the Russians have developed an anti-ballistic missile system? Well, we thought they did, because who else would do that? There were some analysts who said they're faking that. They didn't do that. They just built a phony building outside of Moscow, then they have that thing. But is that how you bet when millions of lives are at stake? No. You assume the worst. So that is what led to the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM Treaty of, I want to say, 72, 73. The Russians bluffed us into thinking they had a similar system. And so they have a track record of doing this, because anybody, a competent 14-year-old, Monday morning in high school could do better CGI than what Putin showed. But Putin knows that there are Americans sitting there in the Pentagon saying, is that really the way to bet? We'll be back right after this. More on this. One of the more fantastic weapons, the nuclear cruise missile when we come back. Is it a bluff, or could he really do it? We'll be back on The Dark Secret Place. Brian sits in here till midnight. KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. Michael Chapay with the news.
Authorities say that a driver in Palmdale has been killed after his car drifted across a road and struck a wooden electrical pole. A female passenger survived the crash. It happened at about 12:30 this morning on Avenue P. The woman had just minor injuries. An avalanche has closed the ski resort at Mammoth Mountain. 3 people were partially buried for a time. All 3 are okay. Yes, the Squaw Valley Ski Resort near Reno, 5 people were buried in an avalanche. It closed the resort. All 5.
All right. So Monday I'm going to be Gary and Shannon, and I've been told to be prepared to be in all week. So there's that. So I hope Bill gets better. The deal was Bill had the flu, then he hurt his back, so he's dealing with. Actually, I guess it was a bad cold. So anyway, I'll be in Monday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and I will be prepared to do that all week long. And it sucks because I was supposed to do Kennedy on Tuesday, and I'm even getting a haircut for it. So, yeah. So I know I probably shared too much when I was talking with you guys about meeting with the boss, but yeah. So I had a meeting with the boss, and the subject of the meeting was, why is it that I'm number one at 10 p.m. to midnight, and the salespeople don't seem to know that, and so that's what it was. So I got to, I got to pitch the salespeople. How do you communicate with a submarine? Well, here's how you do it: ULF, ultra low frequency, and the U.S. Navy communicates with ballistic missile submarines through ULF, and you're saying, well, where's the antenna? What is it? What is the antenna that you use for ULF? Well, in the case of the U.S., Jim Creek Naval Station up in Washington near Everett or Snohomish, but also there's a thing called I want to say it's called the Minnesota batholith. There's a gigantic chunk of granite underneath the Midwest of the United States, and it's a unitary chunk of granite, and it is bigger than Minnesota and North Dakota, and that actually is the transmitter for the American ULF system. Let me confirm this with me. You want me to read it to you? For extreme low frequency, one has to find an area with very low ground conductivity, which is opposite of usual radio transmitters. Bury 2 huge electrodes in the ground at different sites and then feed lines to them from a station in the middle. Although other separations are possible, the distance used... As the ground conductivity is poor, the current between the electrodes will penetrate deep into the earth, essentially using a large part of the globe as an antenna. So, as technical as that seems, bottom line is only Russia, the U.S., and India have ever done this successfully. But yeah, making a gigantic dipolar antenna and bury it into a gigantic unitary piece of granite like this thing in the middle. Clam Lake, Wisconsin is where ours was. Clam Lake. So that's how you communicate with submarines.
And learn to thrive at Arizona State University. To learn more about ASU online degrees, text SCHOOL to 35517. That's SCHOOL to 35517.
I'm Nick Soboleski.
a SelectQuote agent with a true story that could save you hundreds of dollars a year. A woman named Linda just called. Her husband, Ray, has a $300,000 group life insurance policy, but is changing jobs and can't take it with him. Well, I shopped the many highly rated term life insurance companies we represent and found Ray, who is 41 and takes medication to control his cholesterol, a 10-year, $500,000 policy. That's almost twice the coverage for less than half of what he had paid. If SelectQuote hasn't shopped for you,
Yep.
you're probably paying too much. For your free quote, call 800-471-9807. 800-471-9807. 800-471-9807. Or go to SelectQuote.com. Since 19...
Yeah, really amazingly capable, very cheap handheld radios, the Baofeng UV5R. But get it in the 8-watt. And by the way, get 2 of them. So...
No need for another app. All the biggest names in podcasting can be found in the iHeartRadio app.
Well, I mean, what would you... If Baofengs suck, what is comparable in price and quality?
How Stuff Works, the New York Times, comedian Mark Maron, Barstool Sports, and more. All available for free. Now your favorite radio app can be your favorite podcast app. Download or open the free iHeartRadio app and tap podcast. Start exploring.
This weekend, the 90th Academy Awards will take place in Los Angeles. Although this
Yeah, Yesu's not cheap.
entertainment industry, the one question that will be asked more than any other has absolutely nothing to do with their craft. I'll explain on this week.
The Jesus Christ Show. Tomorrow morning at 6 on KFI AM 640.
More stimulating talk.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian sits in here until midnight. Next hour, what did a Taliban prisoner say to make American soldiers react? I'll play this again. To make American soldiers react like this. Oh, no, you didn't. So, yeah, that really happened earlier, I guess yesterday. All right, so back to Putin and the new Cold War. Putin also announced that any nuclear attack on a Russian ally will be considered an attack on Russia. And what he's responding to is the new American Nuclear Posture Review, the NPR. Only this is a can of NPR that doesn't offer tote bags. And what it included was something fairly new, and it was hyper-precise, smaller nukes. And why would you want those? Why, shouldn't all nukes be city killers? If you really are interested in deterrence, why would you want hyper-precise, smaller nukes? Well, obviously, the United States wants the capability, for instance, in a decapitation strike in North Korea to actually not just send a MOAB or a MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator, but actually send something that would penetrate the ground and absolutely positively kill everybody within half a mile. This, however, and I think this is why this might be talked back from this president, because that's called nuclear war. But one of the principles of mutually assured destruction was proportional response. Because there were scenarios that even the Russians had for general ground warfare in Western Europe where there were limited nuclear exchanges. The limited exchanges did not lead to massive first strike and second strike and retaliation and all that. So one of the most curious weapons that Putin announced was cruise missiles that would be nuclear powered. As I was talking about, the U.S. played with this idea in the 50s, but the technology required, the weight required, the shielding, it just didn't make it practical. And the notion was to put a nuclear reactor in a plane with a human crew, and it would have the capability of staying aloft for weeks until food ran out. So you would always have that retaliation, that second strike. But we never did it. The downside just was too big. And then obviously, where would those planes hold? Would they be circling over the North Pole or what? And stuff breaks. So do you really want a nuclear reactor falling over Iowa? Well, so according to Putin, in this one animation, they launch a cruise missile that kicks in a nuclear engine. And with the nuclear engine, the cruise missile flies around American missile defenses, whether it's at sea on a U.S. Navy ship or land-based or whatever. And in the animation that he showed, the nuclear cruise missile flew through the North Atlantic, through the Mid-Atlantic, and it went around in a giant capital S around some U.S. Navy ships, flew around South America. So now we're talking about like maybe 400 or 500 miles an hour, not supersonic or hypersonic, but a cruise missile cruising along at 500 miles an hour. Now it flies around South America. Now it heads back up north along Chile, up into the Pacific, and into some unknown target. Not Hawaii and not California. And so why would you want that? Well, the Pentagon is revealing that we have been watching them test this missile and that it has crashed several times. And I don't know what the R&D process is in Russia, but I would just imagine that if you're testing a nuclear cruise missile and you're having multiple crashes, it might be time to either go back to the drawing board or drop the project. But whatever it is, what the Russians have calculated here is unlike a manned bomber, which you would have to shield with lead. And the last metal you want to put on an airplane, not besides shooting out of an airplane, the last metal you want to use to construct an airplane is lead. But you have to shield a reactor if there's humans on there. Well, the Russians clearly have developed a tiny nuclear reactor that can, purely through convection, can suck air in. It'll get boosted up to a certain speed. The reactor starts reacting. And what does a reactor do? It generates heat. So it starts generating heat. Air is coming into an intake. It's superheating. And as it expands on the way out, it becomes a jet, right? And so who knows? Maybe there's 6 ounces of plutonium or something in there, or uranium or whatever. But Putin unveiled this, and just simply the threat that they might even try this has us taking it very seriously. And so what it effectively is it's not an announcement that we're going to war with Russia. It's an announcement that Putin and his third-rate economy, again, Italy has a more productive economy than Russia, but it always has. The Soviet Union's economy was a basket case, and Russia currently still is not much better. It's all energy dependent. But Putin wants to make sure that the world listens to Russia and that they, just like all of us growing up in the Cold War, that they have a first-rate ability to put effects on target. Maybe individually the guys aren't very good or the tanks aren't very good, but collectively they have the ability to have the same effect that we do. That's what Putin was saying. So is it Cold War 2.0? Well, that would be naive to say that now, because it's been Cold War 2.0 for about 15 years now. That's just that Putin's arsenal has caught up. All right, next hour, President Xi Jinping of China announces that he's won every election forever. He is now president for life. Also, South Korea announcing late today, a South Korean delegation will go to North Korea. So what does that mean? And the American troops getting a big crack up by that Taliban guy. All that in hour number 2 of The Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight on KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk.
People think Southern is all convertibles on the PCH and theme parks. We know it's
All right. We have a few minutes for questions. Yeah, I will. I'll do a live stream during Gary and Shannon from 10 to 2. And that. Hopefully there'll be lots and lots and lots of news. We've been having a real good Wi-Fi these last couple weeks, but lately it's been going kind of crazy. Is it, are we still streaming pretty good? A good strong stream. And yeah, I should point out, I can't talk about this on the air, but I have a good friend who is a Army pathologist, and he actually, a lot of people don't know this, but in the War on Terror, ever since 2001, the United States has autopsied every single American casualty. This is the first time in a war this has ever been done. So for the past 17 years, we have autopsied every KIA, every American KIA. And he did it in Iraq in 2005 and 2006. Then he did it in Afghanistan in 2011. Then he did it back in Iraq in 2013. And so I asked him, hey, give me your no shit assessment about the M4 bullet, the 5.56 millimeter bullet that we fire in war, the green tip as it's called. And I told him my assessment is that it's not a very good bullet for killing people. Its intent was to defeat Russian body armor in the Cold War. It was intended for me to be shooting at a Russian soldier wearing body armor. And so if you're fighting people in tracksuits, it overpenetrates, and and that's the thing, is that he also did autopsies of some enemy KIAs, and so he's a subject matter expert. How's it? All casualties were medevac through Kuwait. Out of Iraq, you went to Kuwait, and out of Afghanistan, you went to Kuwait. All dead went through Kuwait, and that's where it was done. So anyway, bottom line, there's nothing magical about the AR-15, and if what it boils down to is, you're sending a whole lot of 5.56 bullets. Well, okay, then what about the 5.56 bullet? Is there something magical about that? Well, there's not. It's a rifled bullet. That's all it is. It doesn't tumble, like that dipshit Mark Kelly said. The astronaut Mark Kelly. The bullet doesn't tumble. It doesn't tumble when it hits soft flesh. It reacts like any other rifled round. So, yeah. So here is the deal. I'm going to keep this to 1 hour because they upload and YouTube manages things better when they're at 1 hour. So I'm going to stop this here at 1 hour, and then we'll restart. I think there's going to be a lot of dipshit gun talk and also the hashtag #MeToo and all that. So, yeah, I will. If I can get this signal again, I'll start up again for hour number 2. But, so I will sign off here at 58:50, and I will reacquire signal when I'm back from the far side of the moon.